So today is the last day of the transfer portal being open, and recently we have had a ton of new commitments and news coming out on where players could potentially be playing next season. So in today's video, I'm doing another update on the transfer portal and going over all the latest news and notes around it. So let's jump into it. And I gotta start out with what's the biggest news in the transfer portal right now, and that's that John Blackwell looks like he might be heading to Durham to join the Duke Blue Devils. And John Blackwell might be the most important uncommitted player left in the transfer portal right now, and all signs are pointing towards Jon Scheyer and Duke. The Wisconsin transfer averaged 19 points per game while shooting nearly 39% from three for the Badgers, and that kind of scoring production at 6'4" immediately translates to one of the best programs in the entire country. But he's not just a scorer, because he also rebounds at a high level for a guard and can create a bit for others as well. And if Jon Scheyer is able to land him, this becomes a massive addition. Duke would be adding one of the best pure shot making guards in the entire portal and a potential go-to option offensively, and this would push their ceiling to the next level. And Blackwell was on his visit to Duke yesterday, and it looks like they have a very good shot to land him for next season. But another top transfer actually just made their commitment, and that's Donnie Freeman from Syracuse, who has committed to Rick Pitino and St. John's for next season. And this is one of the biggest decisions in the transfer portal recently. The Syracuse transfer averaged 16.5 points and 7 rebounds per game this past season, and at 6'9", he brings real scoring versatility to the front court there for the Johnnies, which is missing a lot now that Zuby Ejiofor, Bryce Hopkins, and Dylan Mitchell are no longer with the program. But Freeman can finish inside, face up, and makes plays in space, which should fit perfectly with how Rick Pitino wants to play. And St. John's beat out Kentucky in this one, which is huge for both the Johnnies and the Wildcats. And this isn't just a good pickup, it's a tone setter, because St. John's just landed one of the best forwards in the portal and should be a focal point of their team immediately next season. And another commitment we just got was Mouhamed Dioubate from Kentucky has committed to Will Wade and LSU. And Dioubate is the first portal addition that Will Wade has had so far since he's gone back to LSU, and he feels like the kind of foundational move that's going to set the tone for the rest of the portal moves that Will Wade makes. He averaged 9 points, 5.5 rebounds, and around 2 combined stocks per game at Kentucky, but his impact goes beyond the numbers, because Dioubate is 6'7", is an athletic, versatile forward who can defend, rebound, and plays with real energy, and he's already played at Alabama and Kentucky, so he brings valuable SEC experience into Will Wade's system. And as I mentioned, this is LSU's first portal addition, and it's a strong one. And Dioubate fits the identity Wade wants, which is tough, active, and capable of impacting the game on both ends, but LSU still has a ways to go to filling out this roster. And then we got another big get out of the portal, and that's Terrence Hill Jr. from VCU, who's heading to Tennessee. And Terrence Hill Jr. to me just feels like a very Tennessee type of addition, because he brings toughness, shot making, and real backcourt versatility to a backcourt that Rick Barnes and the Volunteers have gotten better and better through the transfer portal. Hill Jr. averaged 15 points per game at VCU and dropped 34 points in that NCAA tournament upset win over North Carolina, and he proved he can score against high-level competition all season long. He's a true 3-level scorer who can knock down catch-and-shoot threes, create off the bounce, and finish in traffic, and the underrated part in his game is his control as a decision-maker, especially in the pick and roll, and Tennessee is replacing scoring in the backcourt from Jacoby Gillespie with Terrence Hill Jr., and he looks like a player who can step in immediately and handle a major role for the Volunteers. And then we got Duke, who landed their first commitment from the transfer portal in Drew Scharnowski from Belmont, and Scharnowski is the kind of front court pickup Duke absolutely needed. He averaged 11 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists at Belmont this past season, while shooting an absurd 68% from the field, and that tells you how efficient he was around the basket last season. He brings energy, toughness, and a high motor every single possession, and at 6'9" and 230 pounds, he has the size to hold up physically in the ACC, but he also moves well enough to defend in space and switch actions when needed. The perimeter shooting is still the big question, but as a defender, rebounder, finisher, and passer, this looks like a really strong rotational addition for the Blue Devils. But even bigger news for Duke is that Patrick Ngongba has announced that he is returning for his junior season for the Blue Devils, and that's just as important as any portal addition would be. He gives John Shire a skilled 6'11" big man who already knows the system, has proven he can score efficiently, and now brings legitimate NBA draft buzz back with him. And that matters because instead of trying to replace frontcourt production from scratch, Duke gets continuity and upside back at the same time, and Ngongba's return also makes Scharnowski addition fit even better because now Duke can play even bigger lineups when needed. And for a team with championship expectations like the Blue Devils, keeping a projected first-round caliber big is a huge win for them. But Duke also lost somebody in the transfer portal, and that's Nikolas Khamenia, and he just announced that he has committed to Dan Hurley and UConn. And Nikolas Khamenia at UConn feels like one of the cleanest system fits in the entire portal to me. He averaged 6 points at Duke this past season, but he was never fully featured, but the talent was obvious. At 6'8", he gives UConn a stretch forward option who can potentially slide into an Alex Caravan type of role. And the biggest number here is the 37.5% catch and shoot 3-point mark from Khamenia, because in Dan Hurley's offense, players who can move, think, and space the floor usually thrive, and that's exactly who he is. And he should get a much bigger role, likely from day one with UConn, and this feels like the kind of move that could unlock a breakout season for Khamenia. But just like Duke, UConn also got one of their star players back, and that's Braylon Mullins, and him coming back to UConn is massive for the Huskies because this is more than just returning production. This is a player who averaged 12 points per game as a freshman, hit the game winner against Duke to send the Huskies to the Final Four, and still chose his development over a likely first-round NBA draft selection. And that says a lot about Mullins and UConn, and he looks like a future pro, but another year with Dan Hurley could push his game to another level, and I really expect him to have a breakout sophomore season with the UConn. And he has real scoring instincts, confidence in the big moments, obviously, and the chance to become one of the best guards in all of college basketball next season. And I did want to mention that solo ball from UConn actually just announced that he is undergoing wrist surgery and will miss the entirety of next season for the Huskies. But he wasn't the only player for UConn that won't be there next season, because Jaylin Stewart announced that he's entering the transfer portal, and it's one of those moves that might not look massive statistically, but it still matters for the Huskies. He averaged just 4 points and 2.5 rebounds per game, but more importantly, he was a real key bench piece for a UConn team that made the Final Four this past season. And players like Stewart help stabilize rotations, defend multiple spots, and keep lineups functional when stars sit. And losing that kind of depth could hurt UConn, but I do think their moves in the portal overall should help with both of these missing pieces for the team next season. And then there's the Kentucky Wildcats, who had missed out on a few players in the portal earlier on, but they just got another commitment from Furman guard Alex Wilkins. And Wilkins, to me, is one of the most interesting players out of the portal. He averaged 18 points and 5 assists per game at Furman as a freshman. And at 6'5", he brings the kind of positional size and playmaking Kentucky usually loves in the backcourt. He's really good in the pick and roll, but the fascinating part to me is how he's going to fit next to Zoom Diallo, because both players like to operate on the ball. But still, I do think there are ways that this can work, because Wilkins shot 37% on catch and shoot threes, and I do think his shooting is going to be even better as a sophomore next season. So he will be able to play off the ball too, which is going to give Kentucky more flexibility offensively, and he's still one of the biggest gets of the transfer portal this cycle. And another blue blood that got into the mix was Kansas, who landed a commitment from Leroy Blyden Jr. And Blyden Jr. feels like a really smart Jayhawk addition because he gives them another young guard who already proved he can produce and lead at a high level. He averaged 16.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 4.5 assists this season at Toledo. He won the MAC Freshman of the Year and shot over 40% from beyond the arc. And that's a strong combination of scoring, efficiency, and decision-making from a freshman. He's quick, he can score at all 3 levels, and he doesn't waste possessions with careless turnovers. And Kansas is clearly trying to build out its backcourt with more creators, and Blyden looks like a player who can make an immediate impact next season for the Jayhawks. Another team that's been hot in the portal is Miami, and they landed yet another commitment from Robert Morris forward Desean Goode. And Desean Goode might be one of the biggest analytics winners in the portal because he averaged 15 points and 9 rebounds at Robert Morris while shooting 63% from the field and an incredible 57% from three, even though the volume from there was definitely lower, but he has shown the ability that he can hit those type of shots. And at 6'8" and 230 pounds, he's a physical forward who can rebound, finish, stretch the floor, and punish mismatches, and that combination is rare. He also posted huge offensive rebounding numbers, which makes him even more valuable, and Miami is getting a super productive player in Goode, whose efficiency profile jumps off the page in just about every way, and he should help make one of the stronger frontcourts in the ACC there next to Santos Cerril. UConn big man Eric Reibe actually just announced where he's transferring to, and that's Eric Musselman in USC, and Eric Reibe transferring to USC feels like a classic bet on upside move from Musselman. At UConn, the 7'1" center only averaged 6 points and 3 rebounds in just 14 minutes per game for the Huskies, which means his production was actually pretty solid in those limited opportunities that he saw. And when Taurus Reed was out with injury, Eric Reibe definitely stepped up and showcased his talent and clearly showed flashes, especially early in the year. His best game came against Arizona when he scored 15 points and blocked 2 shots against one of the best teams in all of college basketball this past season, and gave us a glimpse of what he can become with more consistent playing time. And USC should give him a bigger opportunity, and that alone makes this one worth watching, and I think Reibe could be one of the better bigs in the Big Ten next year. Next, we got Thomas Dowd from Troy, who also announced where he is transferring to, and that is Stephen Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. And Thomas Dowd is a really big-time portal addition for Auburn because he brings production, athleticism, and edge on the defensive end. He averaged 14.5 points and 10 rebounds at Troy while helping lead them to back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances, and he was also the Sun Belt Tournament MVP this season. At 6'8", he plays bigger than his size because of how explosive he is around the rim and how hard he competes night in and night out. He can defend, rebound at a high level, and brings energy each and every night, and Auburn needed more physicality and frontcourt production, and Dowd looks like a player who checks both of those boxes immediately. But as soon as Auburn landed Thomas Dowd, Sebastian Williams-Adams announced that he is entering the transfer portal, and that is going to be a blow for Auburn. He averaged 7 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists while starting 21 games as a freshman for the Tigers, and he had a real role with them, gave Auburn defensive value, and even scored 13 points in the NIT championship game, and was definitely looking better as the season went on. And with Auburn landing Thomas Dowd, it just felt like the front court picture changed fast for the Tigers, and Williams-Adams just decided that he was going to enter the portal, and he is still a useful player with good size and defensive tools, and there should be absolutely a ton of interest from other high major programs. And I did want to mention that Auburn also announced that they landed a commitment from Creighton big man Owen Freeman, and he, to me, is one of the more fascinating buy low pickups in the portal because this past season at Creighton definitely did not go as expected, as he only averaged 5 points and 4 rebounds in limited minutes with the Jays. But if you remember 1 year earlier at Iowa, he averaged 17 points, 7 rebounds, and nearly 2 blocks per game, and looked like one of the better young bigs in the country. So the talent is clearly there, and if he can get back to that type of production with Auburn, he could be one of these steals of this portal cycle. And then Alabama announced that they landed a commitment from Boise State big man Drew Fielder, and this one to me is one of my favorite fits out of the entire portal because Fielder feels almost tailor-made for the Crimson Tide offense. He averaged 15 points, 6 rebounds at Boise State while shooting 55% from the field and nearly 41% from beyond the arc at 6'11", which is exactly the kind of offensive player Nate Oates wants in his front court. And Alabama's offense thrives on spacing, pace, and forcing defenses into impossible choices, and Fielder fits right into that identity because he's a big who can stretch the floor at that level, which changes everything. And he may not be a flashy headline move nationally, but from a system standpoint, this could be one of the smartest additions in the portal in my opinion. And another big commitment was Ace Class from Washington State, who announced he has committed to Mark Byington and the Vanderbilt Commodores. And Ace Class gives Vanderbilt exactly what every team wants more of, which is instant offense. As a freshman, he averaged 16.5 points per game at Washington State while shooting 45.5% from the floor and 36.5% from three, and he's the type of guard who can create his own shot and puts real pressure on defenses. He's a former 4-star recruit out of high school, so the talent has always been there, and now he's coming off a season where he proved he can produce at a high level, and pairing him with Tyler Tanner in the backcourt gives Vanderbilt what should be electric offensively there from the guards and one of the more entertaining duos in the SEC. And Vanderbilt added 2 additional pickups in the portal in Bangot Dak and Buyuckntel. And Bangot Dak is a really intriguing pickup for Vanderbilt because he brings size, mobility, and defensive versatility to the front court. At 7 feet tall, he averaged 11.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game at Colorado. And what stands out most is how well he moves for his size. He can run the floor, protect the rim, and even hold up better than most bigs when forced to defend in space. Offensively, he also gives you value as a rim runner and finisher, but the bigger appeal might be his upside, and Vanderbilt needed frontcourt help, and Dak gives them a lot to work with. And then you also have Buyuckntel, who is not the flashiest portal addition from Nebraska, but he could end up being one of those really important winning pieces. He averaged 6.5 points and 5.5 rebounds at Nebraska and played a meaningful role for a team that had a historic season and made the NCAA tournament, which matters. He brings experience, toughness, and some positional versatility in the front court for the Commodores, and Vanderbilt clearly wanted to add around its more high usage offensive pieces. And he may not be the first name people talk about, but every roster needs players who can connect lineups and do the little things, and Berke fits that mold perfectly. But another team that's having a hot transfer portal so far is the Texas Longhorns, and Sean Miller and the Longhorns added another transfer in Elyjah Freeman from Auburn. And Elyjah Freeman to Texas feels like one of the most impactful upside swings in the portal. He averaged 9 points and 5.5 rebounds at Auburn, but the real intrigue is in his upside. At 6'8", he's an explosive athlete, a disruptor, defender, and a player with clear two-way potential. And the advanced defensive indicators jump out too, with strong block and steal rates that show how active he is on that end. And Texas keeps loading up with long, versatile pieces, and Freeman fits that perfectly and should be the perfect replacement for Jaylin Stewart, who is most likely going to the NBA draft. And if his offensive game continues to develop like I think it will, this move could look even bigger by mid-season for the Longhorns. But Texas didn't stop there because they also added Tennessee transfer Amari Evans, and Evans is more of a role player pickup for Texas, but this matters especially on the stacked roster that the Longhorns have. He averaged 4 points, 3 assists, and 1 steal in limited minutes at Tennessee this past season, but his appeal is really tied to his size, strength, and defensive versatility in the backcourt. He was a 4-star recruit for a reason, and Texas is betting on those tools translating into a valuable rotation role for the Longhorns. And he may not be a player who fills up the box score every night, but on a high-level team, having guards who can defend, move the ball, and play within the structure is extremely valuable, and he feels like the perfect replacement for Chendell Weaver to me at Texas. But another one of my favorite pickups is Preston Edmead at NC State, and Edmead looks like a foundational backcourt addition for the Wolfpack. At Hofstra in a freshman season, he averaged 16 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists while shooting nearly 39% from three, and he did all of that as a first-year player in college basketball, which is impressive. He won CAA Rookie of the Year while starting every game, and that tells you how ready he is for a major role on a high-level team. He can score, facilitate, and stretch the floor, which makes him a great piece for a team trying to rebuild its identity after Will Wade left for LSU. And NC State needed a lead guard they could trust, and Edmead feels like someone who can take on that responsibility from the jump. And then you have Florida State, who is also having a great portal season so far because they also got a commitment from Sebastian Rancic, who is one of the more unique forwards in the portal because the skill set is rare for his size. At 6'11", he averaged 12.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2 assists at Colorado, and he showed flashes as a shooter, passer, and a face-up player on the offensive end. And the raw percentages don't fully sell his upside, but his form is good, and he's an elite foul shooter, and there's reason to believe that his shot percentage will keep improving from deep. And that matters a lot for Florida State, where Luke Lux wants to play faster and generate more threes, and this feels like a really smart system-based pickup with room to grow. And finally, I want to mention Rowan Brumbaugh, the transfer from Tulane, and Brumbaugh is one of the biggest portal additions in the country from the mid-major ranks, and SMU should be thrilled that he just committed there. He averaged 19 points, 5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists this past season at Tulane, lane, while also leading the team in steals, which shows how much he impacted the game on both ends of the floor. He can score at all 3 levels, has good size at 6'4", and brings proven production into a major role immediately. Andy Enfield needed a go-to offensive engine, and Brumbaugh looks exactly like he could be just that. And when you add a player who can lead your team in multiple major categories, that changes your ceiling fast and is a great pickup for SMU for next season. But that wraps it up for this transfer portal update. Let me know in the comments down below who you think are the biggest winners and losers out of the transfer portal so far, and who do you think is going to get John Blackwell. Also, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.